Welcome to This Week in Heresy, episode 34, The Art of Alchemy, recorded live at PantheaCon 2015 with our guest, David Menefee. Hi, Dave. Welcome to This Week in Heresy.
Hey, thanks, Gina. I appreciate that. I'm Dave Menefee, and I am a practicing theurgist living somewhere in the Trinity Alps of Northern California.
Excellent. So, what do you mean by alchemist? Because a lot of my listeners won't know what that is, or at least have maybe some romanticized notion of what it is.
So what I do is I work with plants primarily, and medicinal plants specifically, such as, for example, dandelion or echinacea, that sort of thing. The plants typically associated with mild herbal medicine. However, with plant alchemy, what I do is I create medicinals that are stronger. The process of plant alchemy is based on a fundamental principle known as, in the Latin, solve et coagula. Mm-hmm. The idea being that you want to separate the essential portions of the plant into the component parts, and then each of those component parts is, quote, opened up in the alchemical sense, thus making them more receptive to the beneficial healing energies of the plant. And then those components are reassembled in a careful fashion such that, according to alchemical principles, these components retain the life force of the plant. And so what you have is an extremely potent version of that herbal medicine.
Well, my biochemistry tinglies, are like, sure. Oh, this is so cool.
Sure.
Because, I do some herb work myself. I do some aromatherapy.
Nice.
But, how does this differ? Because, I've read a little bit about alchemy, like I said.
Mm-hmm.
Is it more of in the way of like a magic spell, or is it kind of somewhere between the science and magic?
I'd say it's somewhere between. The alchemy is known for being, I would say, a kind of natural magic. There is a very strong emphasis on timing. The influences of planets, the influences of the subtle energies of the earth, both those that arrive from the earth as well as those which are conceived of as girdling the earth in its atmosphere. Likewise, the subtle energies of the primary luminaries, sun and moon, and those of the planets that might be impinging upon that plant's particular properties. The notion then is that you harvest the plant according to those timings, process the plant according to them as well, and subsequently reassemble it. The result is something that is ideally stronger than anything that might be created, even perhaps intentionally. That, of course, is something that every practitioner might want to decide for themselves. The experiences I've had indicate that the more precise the timing, the more sensitive the alchemist is to those timings and to the influences at work. The correspondingly more potent the plant is, the more carefully the plant is prepared, the stronger it is. The idea is simply the increasing of the strength, the opening up of those subtle properties of the plant, such that they are then compatible with the human psyche, with the human energy body, and then the plant is able to do things that perhaps it wasn't able to do for us or with us before.
How does that compare to typical Western medicine? Because, I've done a lot of alternative medicine stuff, and I know for me how well that works for me. But, there's going to be Joe Schmo scientists. It's like, oh, you're just a quack.
Yeah, sure. I can hear that. No, the difference is that the alchemical medicines are believed to operate at the subtle body level as well as the physical. Just in common with traditional herbalism, we don't conceive of the plants as being, let's say, simple treatments for a given ailment. For example, I know that it's a very common practice when someone catches a cold to reach for the echinacea herb if they know about it, but that's not always appropriate depending upon the nature of the cold, what its origins are. Well, with alchemy, we look further than that. We look at whether or not there are issues with the subtle body that could be corrected or amended, enhanced, or improved that might, as a corollary result, create health. So it's first and foremost, we think of plant alchemy as a kind of initiatory process. The person ingesting the alchemical product is doing so almost in a sacramental fashion. The plant product is considered to be a living ally in that case. So it's an interesting amalgam of the magical, the alternative medicine traditions, and of course the current widespread knowledge of herbs as straightforward medicinals.
What would you say to, somebody who's doing the more allopathic, doing allopathic medicine, because regular standard medicine is actually finally catching on to the whole mind-body connection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it seems, it's dragging its feet, kicking and screaming about it.
Sure.
But, we've seen it work, and we've seen it work. And why do you think they're really dragging their feet on this?
I think that they want to find repeatable cause and effect. The allopathic system wants to be able to replicate results and have falsifiable theories that describe the mechanism behind those results. Alchemy, especially, and even ordinary or not so ordinary, but alternative herbal medicine tends to work in a level that isn't always directly repeatable, although I think that the results from a double-blind study would probably speak for themselves as they have done in the past. But in the case of the alchemical medicinals, because they have got a scope that reaches beyond the simple treatment of disease, they can be considered as a part of a working spiritual path. There is a great deal of a range that can be drawn from their use. I'll give you an example. What we have is, let's say someone has a headache, and they might take, say, aspirin, or they might take meadowsweet if they wanted to take an herb which has been found to be helpful in that case. If, however, this person's headache was derived from stress, then the alchemical herbalist might actually direct them away from something that treated the dilation of blood vessels and towards something that was easing stress. For example, let's say a rosemary tincture prepared alchemically, or let me think, spearmint is actually an extremely good one for that. An alchemical preparation of spearmint, I have found, is actually very helpful for dealing with an influx of destructive energy. Let's say you've just had some difficulty with the job, or you've been around a large crowd of people who were, not too pleasant to be around. Mm-hmm. So I would find that the spearmint actually helped me to sort of smooth things out internally. The stress headache that I might ordinarily get just doesn't come about. So it's a little bit of a sort of preventative in that fashion. But again, I'm not really preventing the physical symptoms so much as I am attempting to bolster a portion of my own psyche, my energy body, so that it can deal with an adverse situation more effectively, and then I don't even have those symptoms to begin with.
Yeah. That sounds a lot like in biotechnology these days. There's a lot of medicines coming out that bolster the systems that are already in place. Mm-hmm. So there's one particular drug that I used to actually do quality control for, where it took the pain receptors for rheumatoid arthritis and created the receptors that made healthy joints, and it imitated that. And, in some ways, that sounds a little alchemical in itself, because from what you've described to me, it sounds like you're taking what's there and what's already in your body and what can be effective and just bolstering that and making sure that it's working the way it should.
Yeah, definitely. I would my own philosophy has always been that pretty much any tool in the toolbox can be useful when applied with knowledge, so that I would consider it a prudent choice in the case where someone's physical body required a particular treatment, and I would of course consult a qualified licensed practitioner, but I would definitely not shy away from reaching for the heroics in a case where it was something that required them, or if it was something that required some other form of treatment like that. The alchemical tradition parallels the Chinese in certain ways. The Chinese system dictates that one treat the root and the branches of a situation. In alchemy, the similar sort of approach is taken, where one is attempting to work with both the subtler portion of the human's anatomy and then working to the physical as well. It's because the psyche or the physical, the psychophysical anatomy is broken into approximately 3 principles, which have been codenamed salt, sulfur, and mercury. The alchemical tradition will therefore look at an element or a situation and consider it to be 1 or 2 or 3 of those, depending upon how it's manifesting, and then treat accordingly. And the alchemical medicines being considered to be strong in any one of those or all 3 of those, depending upon how they're used, that's how we would go about arresting a particular ailment or correcting an imbalance or even simply strengthening an already healthy system so that it can grow and better deal with the situation.
What's the difference between the alchemy you're doing now and what people know of as classical alchemy?
That's a good question. A certain individual by the name of Paracelsus, Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, he codified the practice of plant alchemy. And what he was doing was essentially creating an alternative system which parallels the more traditional work with the mineral kingdom. But in doing so, you might bypass some of the more dangerous aspects of the mineral work and at the same time gain some training, some practice in the techniques and skills that you might need when doing mineral work. So I would think of plant alchemy in that sense as a kind of undergraduate version of full-blown mineral alchemy. And to that extent, the two have the same aims. And in fact, in the plant alchemical tradition, it goes well beyond the creation of medicinals. It encompasses the same approximate goals, including the creation of the plant kingdom's version of the Philosopher's Stone, and as well as the creation of other forms of the plant product which resemble the stone. There actually are quite a few different things that are created with plant alchemy that bear little resemblance to medicinal herbalism. The creation of extremely powerful solvents, for example, that are capable of separating the plant's constituents almost immediately. That's one of the things that are possible to create, and you start out with, as it turns out, a plant resin found in the Mediterranean basin. And the end result is something that is extraordinarily caustic and capable of taking a plant and dropping the oil and the other more subtle constituents out in a matter of moments. And then the plant stone, I have constructed or concocted or confected, as the term would be, a liquid stone. It's also known as a chlysis, and it's considered to be one of the higher products. It is not as difficult by any means to create as the full stone of the plant kingdom, but it does partake of the same general ideas, wherein the plant is divided into its 3-fold components, those which carry the salt, those which carry the sulfur, and those which carry the mercury. Each of those then subsequently opened up, purified, and otherwise set up for the subsequent reunification and the creation of this liquid process. And what you have there is a very much initiatory product, something which you take in order to refine your own energy body and to make you more sensitive to the influences that that plant represents.
Oh, that's just kind of like thinking about it with my biochemistry brain. That's kind of like, wow. But could you describe the Philosopher's Stone and a little bit about the history about it? Because I think most people only know about that through Harry Potter. So.
Oh, yeah, sure. So the thing about the stone, and this is an interesting element within alchemy, in the mineral kingdom particularly, the stone is shrouded in ambiguity. And this is partially deliberate because, as it turns out, one is sort of expected and encouraged to seek out an existing practitioner in order to learn the methodology. That being said, there have been several attempts at the creation of distributed learning, and one of the most recent notably being a course of study that was authored by the Philosophers of Nature, subsequently having become disbanded, but the course is still available, actually. You can buy the CD for $100. Anyway, the stone can be considered to be a physical object that is the culmination of alchemical work in the mineral kingdom. It can also be considered to be a result within the alchemist. And there is actually in alchemy no distinction drawn between the two. The one person put it that the creation of the mineral stone is proof of the transformation that has already occurred in the alchemist. Subsequently, that therefore the alchemist is able to do the work that the stone potentiates, whether or not there is a stone present. There is also, of course, a great deal of legend regarding the stone, such as that it confers longevity or immortality, that it is capable of being a universal medicine, that it is capable of being the universal solvent, capable of reducing anything into its component parts and rejoining them at a higher level, therefore resembling very strongly the initiatory aspects of something like that. The ambiguities arise precisely because there is that fuzzy indistinction between some product that's produced, an actual physical object, and the transformed alchemist whose very presence would precipitate the activities, of course, that are traditionally associated with such a stone, including longevity and so forth. We start talking about certain legendary figures that are said to have lived for thousands or hundreds of years. The truth or lack thereof of that is, of course, something that I'm not going to speak about. But nonetheless, the plant kingdom is the same on a lower arc. Not to say that it isn't every bit as valuable in its own way, but there is relatively less ambiguity. It is still absolutely crucial to understand that the alchemist is undergoing the process as a result of the creation of the stone. The alchemist is in the experiment, as they would say. And so when you have finally confected a plant stone, at that point in time, you have yourself arrived at the place where the plant stone is the proof and not merely the product. It's your demonstration, your masterwork.
That's interesting because, you're describing the initiatory process of it, and it sounds very much like when somebody's, going through any other initiatory process. And what's fascinating to think about is that, there's the alchemist doing the initiatory process, but then there's also the healing aspect of it. And that, as you were saying before, just taking the product, whatever plant medicinal, is part of that process. And you've got a lot of the finding of wholeness in that.
That's right.
And that just seems really fascinating to me, that you can, not only is it the process, but also the product helping you obtain that process.
Absolutely. The two go hand in hand. The creation of the lesser plant medicines, as they would be termed, the plant products, such as, let's say, the planetary tinctures or related, the creation of those is part of your process as the alchemist. The subsequent ingestion of those reinforces that process and allows you to work at a correspondingly more refined arc. They work on your body, both physical and energetic, and help to make it more sensitive to those influences, make it more capable of working with them, opening you up, opening up your faculties, both latent and actual, and making them more profound and available to you. The interesting thing about the creation of alchemical products, and this is something I want to bring up, is that many of them cannot be replicated in a straight laboratory. If you were to go into a modern clinical laboratory with no alchemical intent, you would find yourself at odds with the process, unable to properly replicate it. The alchemist must be in the experiment, must be in the work, which oftentimes means the creation of and establishing of sacred space, or whatever that means for the alchemist. Thus the phrase ora et labora, the first prayer and then the work. Prayer being whatever corresponds to the inner work of the alchemist. The two go hand in hand. And so you're right, though, the product itself is profoundly useful. The alchemist isn't always able to maintain some sort of high pitch in that work, and so being able to ingest the product helps you to build that. It's I'm trying to reach for something here. The creation of an ingestible talisman, I think, is what we're really talking about. It's a consumable talisman.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. You know, because I could bake a stone for my mother to help her with whatever healing, but then you'd also, if I did it, I could have her ingest something as well to help her with that process. Oh, and
that's right. You bring up an interesting point. The alchemist can create these for others, and they would have these beneficial effects for others. The one of the things that I've discovered, and I don't know whether this is universal or just because of the way my own particular mind works, but it seems to me that it requires continual work with these things to increase your sensitivity to them. It seems that initially the product has some difficulty in creating results, but the continued work with it opens you up to it and makes you correspondingly more sensitive to it so that it works better for you. And who wouldn't want that? You know, being able to say, take a half a dropper full of something and have it immediately work to your benefit. That's a good sort of thing to work toward.
Absolutely. Also, you were talking about earlier about the components, you know, not like being in a lab and having the individual components being pulled out and not necessarily working the same way.
Right.
It reminds me of, you know, a lot of the early pharma where, you know, they would go to different indigenous tribes and indigenous places and find people taking these plants and being cured of whatever. And then, you know, they'd go to the lab and try and decide what the main component is. They'd make a drug and it fails.
Yes. And
that happens quite a bit, you know, unless these days there's a lot of refinement and they're a little bit better, but, you know, especially stuff for any sort of mental health issue, you know, they fail a lot of the time.
Yes, they do.
Because, you know, there's something about the combined energy of the plant, the combined chemistry of the plant that is missing in the pharma refining process.
Yes. That's one of the significant failings, which perhaps will be rectified at some point if we see an introduction of some of these principles, some of these ideas into modern pharmaceutical work. Then that would be a tremendous. I couldn't tell you how excited I'd be if I heard them talking about the life force of the plant. I don't know when that's going to ever happen, but who knows? You know. At any rate, yes, that's exactly right. The lack of replicability has been one of the reasons why these traditional methods are looked somewhat askance. The meanwhile, we continue making our plant medicines, and they continue working.
Yeah. Why, I guess the repeatability is part of the reason why they automatically assume that something's not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
But, is there any other, is it kind of like a matter of pride? Like, I'm a scientist, so, and I do this. And so, if it doesn't match my view of what science is, then it's not going to work.
I think it's because they don't understand mechanism, too. I'm sure that there are scientists who would be thrilled to discover whatever mechanism that exists that allow these things to do the job that they do. But the mechanism doesn't fall within the paradigm. And I think that's partly because there has been no acceptance of the connection that exists between healer and the person needing healing, the connection that exists between the medicine being applied and the whole process. The whole thing is an entire holistic process. This is true, in plant alchemy as well as in other sorts of traditional medicinal techniques. And so you're going to find that there is a wholeness to that gets broken as soon as you start trying to create purely physical medicines that distance the practitioner, let's say, or the creator of the medicine from those who take it. Mm-hmm. You're not going to be able to crank out a factory load of alchemical spearmint, for example, and expect it to do anything.
Right.
There are some excellent alchemists who do create alchemical preparations that are available for sale. And there is a distinction there in that they themselves have been putting themselves into the product and distributing it, so it's got potency that you might not find in a factory product. Mm-hmm. But in general, yeah.
Would something like that be pretty hard on the alchemist if they're putting all that energy into their product?
They wouldn't be necessarily putting their bodily energy into it so much as they're participating in the process, keeping in mind that it is a form of natural magic and heavily dependent on timing and on the influences of, say, planets and so forth. Ideally, the alchemist simply observes the appropriate times, enters into a meditative state, and then works in conjunction with the plant's own transformation. If that alchemist has made that plant an ally and has worked with it regularly and consistently, then the suffering of the plant, for example, is something that the alchemist can be compassionately part of without being destroyed by it.
Right.
The process becomes more familiar to the alchemist.
So more of their own, what we would call, grounding and centering, so that you're not using your own power and killing yourself in the process of doing your magic.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I know you teach alchemy and have taught alchemy. What is the process of somebody who is like, oh, that sounds really interesting and would like to learn about it? Like, what would you suggest that they do, if they can't find somebody to help teach them?
Well, there are a number of interesting resources online. That's actually where I got my first start. My dad was a chemist. Mm-hmm. He's retired now. But so he introduced me to a lot of the physical processes that are required. Consequently, I feel comfortable with the skill set. And because I had already taken the art up by the time I had been working in the esoteric tradition for a while, the underlying principles weren't terribly difficult for me to understand. That being said, if someone who was really new to the Western path wanted to come into alchemy, I couldn't recommend too highly that they make a serious study of the inner work first, and get to a point where they're at least comfortable with the notions behind controlled meditation, learning how to discipline their mind, having at least a fundamental grasp of what subtle energy is, so that then subsequently they would get the most out of the alchemical work. And the plant kingdom work is so forgiving. I don't think you require that there be an apprenticeship in order to be able to start to work in the plant kingdom right away once you've had some grounding in the esoteric tradition. Mm-hmm. And like I said, there are online resources, alchemy resources. Really, you could just Google the heck out of it and find some good stuff. And again, I do mention this. I don't have a stake in it, but I have found that the Philosophers of Nature's the course of materials that they published, and subsequently is available as a $99 CD on eBay. I forget the guy's name, but I bought a copy, and it's just wonderfully detailed, a good self-paced, self-study course in Kabbalah, plant alchemy, mineral alchemy. I couldn't recommend it too highly. There are several excellent books on the subject. Mark Stavish put out a pretty darn good one recently. There's another one. What's the name of that alchemist up in Seattle area? Robert Bartlett. Yeah, he's a genius. Yes. Yeah, check out Robert Bartlett's work. He's written some excellent material on the subject, and you could learn a lot from him. So yeah, that's where I would go.
Excellent. What about learning the history of alchemy? Because I've taken Western esoteric courses, and we did a whole section on alchemy and the fathers of alchemy. Because you mentioned Paracelsus, and I was just like, oh yeah, I studied that. Mm-hmm. And I found that really useful in a lot of our work because we do some ceremonial stuff in our coven as well. So I found that very useful just to see what the thought process is, the thought process was, and how it got to this point in time. Yes.
I would recommend both the historical study, and there is, I believe, a website that's devoted to collecting all manner of writings. Blast. I didn't really have the bibliography on hand, but I can.
Esoteric Archive?
The Esoteric Archive.
We've talked about that before on the show. So.
Yeah, that's excellent sort of source material. There's a quite a bit in there. I would also recommend picking up copies of the symbol books. Mm-hmm. There are a variety of those which are basically illustrations of the alchemical process done by different authors from the time. Each one is an illuminating and revealing version, and what they do is they also show you some of the historical thought by virtue of, looking at the drawing style. There's quite a few of these, and
that's cool.
You
I've
look
seen
at those,
a little bit of it. Yeah,
they're beautiful, and each one of them is it yields a tremendous amount of meditation. I would say that the study of the history of alchemy would go hand in hand with a meditative approach toward these pictograms, these extremely elaborate pictograms. This would give you a deeper sort of grasp of the thought processes behind alchemy as practiced in the medieval period and in the Renaissance. If you were to go back further, you would find yourself reaching a little bit harder for source material, primarily because there was a great deal of secrecy around the processes of the mineral kingdom, which were practiced, many believe, in Egypt. The idea of the Egyptian practices being primarily the creation of the purified metals, gold. Right. And since the Egyptians believed that gold was the flesh of the gods, it made a lot of sense that it would be considered a secretive process to creating that, to purifying it and making it available for the creation of iconography. Mm-hmm. So that kind of takes you back probably beyond the reach of casual, the casual study. Right. But nonetheless, it's worthwhile to search because you might find something useful out of that. Yeah.
Well, I know you're an author in your own right.
Yes.
So, what books?
What have I written?
We're getting closer to the end of our time, so yes. I want to make sure that you talk about your own writing and your own works.
Well, it doesn't have a lot to do with alchemy.
No.
It's but that's okay because the fact that I work with alchemy infuses everything I do to that extent. I've written a novel. It's a paranormal thriller, I guess you could say, set in modern San Francisco. It's entitled The Soul Thief, and I've been told it's rather spooky. Thank you. And the second novel in the series will be coming out in March. It's The God of Battles, and it's a continuation of the story and an expansion on it quite a bit. And I've also published a collection of poems with my partner Rachel entitled Poems de terre, which is a pun on the French word for potato, which is pommes de terre. So
nice.
Yes. And the novel is its main protagonist is a half gypsy psychiatrist named Dr. Angela Cooper, who has got an unusual talent for stepping into the mind of the troubled patient and helping them to sort out their issues rather more directly than most psychiatrists get to do. Mm-hmm. And the book centers around the return of someone she thought lost forever and the subsequent challenges when she runs into that which was chasing this person.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's got some elements of the ghost story, a little bit of the occult, and a great deal of the spooky.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. I think it's not that far from your alchemy because, the way I hear people talk about alchemy and herbalism and other things, it's just as much art as it is science.
Yes. If you were to study alchemy and then you would go through the book, you'll find images in there which derive from alchemical work, sort of tucked away. Think of it as a kind of Easter egg. So, right. But it's available in paperback and Kindle on Amazon. Shortly, it will be available on Apple Bookstore, Kobo, Nook, along with the second book.
Fabulous. Yeah. And like I mentioned earlier, you do teaching, and mm-hmm. Are you planning on doing any teaching in your area, or?
Well, I do teach. I've been teaching a class for the last 5 or 6 years up there in Hayfork. Mm-hmm. We have a small but dedicated group of folks that I work with, and we've been practicing theurgy, which is a sort of superset of the work that's done in alchemy. And they've worked with me on some alchemical work as well. Our practices have been derivative of some of the traditional work of the Golden Dawn, but done in a small yoga studio-like environment to accommodate the different needs of a small group with a small populace who could not support a full-scale lodge. Mm-hmm. So, and it's been very gratifying. I've learned far more working with them than I ever did just doing my own studies. So.
And if somebody would be interested in that class, what would they need to, how would they contact you and talk to you about it?
They could certainly reach out to me if they wanted to find out more about it. Drop me a line email. I'm on Facebook, David Menefee. I also have got a little website, although it's sadly out of date. I'm planning on updating it soon. Right now the classes are geographically centered there. I haven't done any distance learning work, but I've had some interest in it. So maybe one of these days soon I might set up a little video shoot or something like that and do a Skype-y type of thing. The kind of work it lends itself best to in-person practice. But that being said, I'm a technophile, so I'm mm-hmm. certainly not averse to figuring out some way of making it more widely available.
Right. And are you doing anything, any particular workshop this weekend?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I am. Thank you.
Excellent.
On Sunday here at the con, I'm going to be 2 to 4, I'm giving a talk on mimetic theurgy. That is the application of mimetics to theurgic practice, as well as the application of theurgy to the study of mimetics. And I will follow the discussion with a practical exercise and then a Q&A. Cool. I have a 2-hour slot starting at 2 o'clock in the Pantheon Suite, room number 1060. Mm-hmm. And yeah.
People will be hearing this later, but,
that's true.
Reference for next year, especially.
There you go. If I get enough interest in this, I might bring it back as a regular presentation in the schedule.
Excellent.
We'll see.
Well, that would be really, really awesome. So, seeing as you are a technophile, if people wanted to ask you questions or talk to you about
sure.
Alchemy, where can they reach you?
Email is good. I like email a lot. So they could reach out to me at tarot, T-A-R-O-T, at highroad, HIGHROAD.org. Excellent.
And do you have a website?
I do. It's Sophic Arts, SOPHICARTS.org. And if that doesn't work, try dmenefee.com. Like I said, I haven't paid a lot of attention to my website lately. Been so busy with the novel and with filmmaking and that sort of thing. So
coming to the con.
Yeah. doing the alchemy, working on the ranch.
Right.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
And I'm not sure exactly when this is going to come out, but this has been really a fascinating discussion, and I've learned a lot more about alchemy now.
Okay. I've enjoyed being talking with you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Gina.
And thank you to the audience. I'd like to thank Dave for joining us this week. As always, if you have comments, questions, or would like to read the show notes, you can go to thisweekinheresy.com. You can support This Week in Heresy by subscribing to the show via iTunes or the Stitcher app, following us on Twitter at TWIH Podcast, or financially through Patreon. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.